You know, some traditions exist for a reason. They're woven into the fabric of our culture, passed down through generations not just as quaint customs, but as genuine warnings. And sometimes, ignoring those warnings can have consequences far more terrifying than you could ever imagine. This is one of those stories. The taxi driver slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt on the gravel road. He killed the engine, the sudden silence of the Atlas Mountains rushing in. With a trembling hand, he pointed up a winding dirt path that disappeared into the darkening slopes. "I take you no further, Sidi," he stammered, his fingers fumbling with a string of prayer beads. "The path to Dar El-Mensi, the forgotten house. You must walk it alone." Youssef just sighed. He was a man of science, an engineer from the bustling city of Rabi. He dealt in concrete, steel, and logic. The village whispers about his late grandfather's house being inhabited by Jinn and by spirits were just that. Whispers, superstitious nonsense. He paid the driver, grabbed his duffel bag, and began the long climb, leaving the fearful man and his rattling beads behind in a cloud of dust. The ascent was grueling. The mountain air grew thin and sharp. By the time he reached the heavy, imposing cedar door of the farmhouse, the sun had vanished behind the jagged peaks. A sudden, biting cold swept through the valley, seeping into his bones. The house itself was a relic, a beautiful testament to old Amazigh architecture. It had thick clay walls designed to keep out the summer heat, high airy ceilings, and a central courtyard laid with faded blue zellige tiles that shimmered faintly in the dying light. But for all its rustic charm, the air inside was thick, stale, and utterly dead. It felt like the house had been holding its breath for a decade. Youssef poured the steaming water into a glass, dropping in a sprig of mint and a sugar cube. He'd made too much, though. The kettle was still half full of boiling water. Without a second thought, without so much as a whisper of the protective prayer, Bismillah, he turned to the stone sink and poured the scalding excess straight down the dark, dry drain. A sound ripped through the house. It wasn't the hiss of steam hitting cold pipes. It was a scream. A deep, guttural, agonizing shriek erupted from the drain, vibrating up through the stone floor and into the soles of his boots. It was a horrifying symphony of a wailing child and a cornered, wounded animal. Youssef dropped the kettle. It clattered against the stone, splashing boiling water onto his jeans, the sting barely registering over the sheer terror that had seized him. "Hello," he called out, his voice cracking, betraying his scientific composure. "Is someone there? A child?" There were no goats here. He had bolted the massive front door himself. The sound stopped. It stopped right outside the salon door. He held his breath, straining his ears. Through the thin gap between the bottom of the door and the floor, he saw a shadow. It wasn't still. It was swaying, a slow, hypnotic back-and-forth motion. Then, a voice. It was a dry, raspy whisper, like the sound of dead leaves being crushed underfoot. Tears of pure terror streamed down his face, hot against his cold skin. He wasn't speaking to a person. He knew that now. The ornate brass door handle began to turn, slowly, agonizingly slowly. With a low, drawn-out creak, the door began to swing inward. Youssef scrambled backward, his bare feet slipping on the cold floor until his spine slammed against the far wall. He tried to pray, to recite the Ayat ul-Kursi, the powerful verse of protection, but his mind was blank. They were raised slightly, and they were covered in horrific burns, the skin red, blistered and peeling away in grotesque flaps. And then his eyes drifted downward. Where her feet should have been, there were the hairy cloven hooves of a mule. The creature, the woman, this guinea raised a charred, blistered finger and pointed it directly at him. Her voice hissed through the silence, no longer a whisper, but a promise of vengeance. Fire for fire. In that instant, the flame in his gas lantern sputtered, flickered once, and died, plunging the room, and Youssef, into absolute, suffocating darkness. 2 days later, a local shepherd, guiding his flock along the lower mountain paths, found a man stumbling near the road. The man was disoriented, babbling incoherently. His modern city clothes were torn and filthy, and most shockingly, his dark hair had turned a stark, premature white. It was Youssef. And Dar El-Mensi, the forgotten house, remains empty on its lonely perch, its thick walls holding a terrible secret, waiting silently for the next unfortunate visitor who forgets to say Bismillah. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more tales from the shadows. Stay safe out there.